9 to 5 Mac had an exclusive report this morning that caught my eye, and it's mainly talking about a new lineup of Mac. We've had pretty much the same stuff for a long time. MacBook Pro, MacBook Air, Mac Mini, iMac, Mac Pro, and just kind of lots of iterations on those categories. But in today's video, we're talking about potentially a new middle tier for the desktop towers called Mac Studio, and why this might end up just being the best Mac you can buy. Let's begin. So I'm still having flashbacks to AirPods Studio, which is why I'm having a harder time knowing if this is actually going to come to fruition, or if it is, are they actually going to use that branding? Is that really the name for it? But the concept is awesome, might I just add. 9 to 5 Mac is saying this would be a tower, so not an all-in-one iMac, but a Mac in between the Mac Mini and the Mac Pro. And this would essentially allow for something with better performance than what the M1 chip, or I think the M2 chip, will offer. 9 to 5 Mac is saying the entry-level version of the Mac Studio would be rocking an M1 Max chip, and there would be an upgraded version with Apple Silicon even more powerful than the M1 Max, which currently does not exist. So let me just first of all say what good news this is if it ends up being correct. For one, it means that Apple is interested in making a relatively affordable Mac that offers more I/O and more capability than the Mac Mini does. And the fact that 9 to 5 is saying that this is not supposed to be better than the Mac Pro or a replacement to the Mac Pro alludes to the idea that Apple might be doing something crazy for their top-of-the-line Mac, especially if the Mac Studio ends up being ready at either the March event or at Quadruple UDC. If this is supposed to be mid-tier and there's already some kind of silicon that maybe stitches two M1 Maxes together or something, and you'll probably be able to buy that for maybe $4,000 or $5,000, then that means Apple still plans on being in, the business enterprise sector and offering something that maybe starts at $6,000 but can be spec'd up to well over $15,000 or $20,000, except still rocking an ARM architecture instead of buying that overpriced Intel garbage and working on the dated x86 format. Apple has something even bigger prepared, but because they know there's a lot of pros out there waiting for more, and of course people who probably want the M1 Max chip but don't want a laptop, Mac Studio might be the stopgap. That might be what holds people over until the real beast comes later. So if this does end up being accurate, I would say my reports earlier about how Apple would probably just update the existing Mac Mini with an M2 chip suddenly start to make a lot more sense. If you want an M1 Pro or M1 Max CPU, it makes more sense for you to get a Studio, and Apple won't necessarily call it a Mac Mini anymore because it needs something to be bigger. And I do think Studio, even though Apple pretty much almost never uses that with their own products, maybe Beats does it on occasion, but that name would actually be perfect, especially because I think it would be a very popular option among content creators like myself. I'm pretty happy with the laptop I have, but just the ability to have something to run, your home studio in a sense. And it might be the perfect little middle ground name to go between, okay, you want a little bit more performance and you want a little bit more power than the everyday consumer, but you don't need like crazy $20,000 Mac Pro levels of performance because that's basically catered towards Pixar and Mark S. Brownlee. So that demographic of people, they're going to spend whatever money they can on a larger size Mac, but Bloomberg in the past has alluded to Apple developing some kind of new custom silicon, and the first part of their report about the M1 Pro and M1 Max ended up being accurate, but the second part has yet to be seen. They mentioned having some kind of 40 high performance cores and up to 128 GPU cores. So you can easily imagine something far, far faster than what Apple has already come forward with in the M1 Max, and making sure that there's some way to buy that silicon without having to buy, a speakers and a display and having to buy it in some super thin, super fancy looking iMac would be really, really nice, especially if the second part of 9 to 5 Mac's report ends up being correct, which is that Apple is working on a Studio display. And I definitely think Studio display is a much better description than Pro display, because studios would appreciate the type of resolution 9 to 5 is reporting about. They're saying Apple wants to increase the pixel density and make it a 7K resolution, because we all know that was the biggest complaint with the Pro display, right? Everyone was like, yeah, 6K, it's just not very good. They didn't say anything about the refresh rate or if it would be mini LED. That is far more interesting in my opinion, but if Apple is planning on actually entering the standalone monitor business and getting a bit more competitive than $6,000 studio studio monitors, it would actually be the perfect way to upsell people on Mac Minis with M2 chips, or in this case, the Mac Studio, which is a bit higher price, and maybe the performance will be really, really good for the money, but then Apple can make their money back by saying, and this machine will work perfectly with our new standalone monitors. So Bloomberg previously has mentioned that Apple is working on cheaper versions of their Pro display, and I'm hoping we get to see those later this year, because I would genuinely be in the market for that. But if you want to showcase what the M1 Pro and M1 Max are capable of, coming up with some more affordable grade monitors people can buy, maybe closer to the $2,000 or $3,000 price point, which is still a lot, but still, you know, way more digestible than the current Pro display. That might be how Apple wins people over if they're not interested in buying the iMac Pro that comes out later. I'm predicting the iMac Pro is still gonna have a chin, and they're probably aware a lot of people don't like the chin, like myself. And when you're trying to design iMacs as thin as the 24-inch iMac is, you can be kind of limited by I/O. So if the Mac Studio ends up being real, I could totally see them rocking more legacy I/O and still having great Thunderbolt connectivity. And I don't expect the price to be as low as the Intel-based Mac Mini for like $1,100, but maybe something that starts around $2,000, particularly given how expensive it is to get a hold of the M1 Max currently, you know? And if we look at the M1 lineup, the Mac Mini is the cheapest way to get that silicon. So if the Mac Studio is real, I think that should be the cheapest way to get a hold of the M1 Max. So maybe that one's gonna start closer to $2,000 or $2,500, and then you can supply all of your own third-party accessories. So if all you care about is Mac OS and performance, this might be a great option. And perhaps something a little bit bigger than a Mac Mini, but yeah, definitely nowhere near as big as a Mac Pro, or pretty much any typical desktop tower these days. So still power efficient, but Apple might be tackling more of the market with just insane value for the performance, which I do think is a good idea. And while most of this stuff isn't rumored to come out at next week's event, I'm still very hopeful that Apple has some surprises for us on Tuesday. So what are you guys expecting? Do you think this sounds right? Do you think it sounds legit? I'll be honest, when I first heard about the Mac Studio, it got me kind of excited for Apple making some kind of Surface Studio clone where it's like iPad OS folded down and Mac OS folded up. That's not happening, but a sheep can dream, okay? Some of y'all count sheep when you're trying to go to sleep. Sheep actually count Apple leaks and how many of them end up being incorrect. All that good stuff. Let me know what you're thinking down in the comments below. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I'll meh in the next one. That was so bad. Oh my god. Why do people watch this channel?